we're here as partners. At best, if we can earn the trust of Nigerian, whether it's political principles or other stakeholders, that's great. But the choices that we're providing advice, we're never dictating. And certainly, even if that were ever true, it is not true today. Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, is the largest country in Africa. It has the potential to be a giant on the global stage. Believe me, the World Bank is tiny. Okay, so our power, I hope, our influence comes from whether we're able to persuade all of you, all the political principals, other stakeholders here in Nigeria, about how we can help and some of the analysis. So that's what we will be sharing today. And then we have the honor of then hearing from several of the Nigerian principals what they think about what we're saying. So let me start with, so there are two reports, as Nancy pointed out. The usual Nigeria Development Update, which comes every 6 months. This time, my role usually in these things is just to pick the title, right? The team does the rest of the work. So this time I suggested Nigeria's Choice. I want to be clear that our mandate is purely developmental. We have absolutely nothing to say about politics. So when we say Nigeria's Choice, it's not about the choice that all of you will be making in February 25th. It is really about the choices in terms of policies, about a vision going forward. That, I hope, actually is really a consensus, regardless of who emerges. So just to be clear, and especially for our friends from the media, Nigeria's Choice, we're talking about policies and ways forward. And the second one, as Nancy pointed out, is the Country Economic Memorandum. This we produce not every 6 months, but every few years. And it's just a longer-term perspective, and then goes into more detail. What are the lessons from, a country's own history, but also from the global experience? And so that is called Charting a New Course. Next slide, please. Both of these, the choice and this idea of charting a new course, are motivated by this picture that we've been showing for a while. In fact, at least since I got here, because this was one of the first things, when I was coming here, I'd spent 5 years in Indonesia, which is a remarkably similar country in so many ways. It's about 270 million people, it's resource rich, it actually went through 30 years of military rule and then emerged in the late 1990s as what I call a noisy democracy, just like India is a noisy democracy. So this picture, so I knew Indonesia's story. What fascinated me, what intrigued me, what puzzled me was Nigeria's story. So let me just take you very quickly. The light blue line shows you what Indonesia's per capita GDP trajectory has been since 1970. The dark blue is the similar picture for Nigeria since 1970. What should strike you, what struck me, was the fact that Indonesia started off below Nigeria and then pretty much has been on an upward trajectory, a pretty steep upward trajectory since then. There were 2 points of kind of temporary reversals. One was in 1998. That was the transition from military rule to democracy. That was Asian financial crisis, we called it. And then the other one you'll see is 2020, where Indonesia, like many countries, was hit very hard by the COVID crisis. And then you see what we're projecting for Indonesia's growth going forward. Nigeria, on the other hand, has been what we call, or what seems to be the case, floating along. Okay? And in some ways, it's been floating along, buffeted by the swells of global oil price movements. So when oil prices go up, Nigeria tends to do a bit better, at least in per capita GDP terms. But then when oil prices go down, things turn to go south again. Now, so that's the idea of, instead of floating along, Nigeria has the potential to chart a new course, to basically be on an upward trajectory. And that's essentially the choice that we're talking about. So just to crystallize that choice in maybe somewhat simplistic terms, I think you will hear that we think that Nigeria is at a particularly critical juncture right now, is because there is a third scenario, which we are calling here, with obvious reference, things fall apart. And the risk of that scenario is growing. And that's the reason why we are bringing this to your attention, that this is really a choice about making sure that that rising to potential scenario is realized, not just over the next decade, but going forward.